My wife, who told me it wasn't what it looked like when I caught her in the act, run out with her affair partner for the hills because I had a powerful argument. I, 32 years old, caught my wife, 30 years old, cheating on me in our marriage bed only a few hours earlier. I'm now locked up at my father's fishing cabin, trying to figure out what I'm going to do from here. I feel useless and ruined. Because of that wrath, I'm filled with rage. My whole life has been thrown down the toilet, and I have no one to speak to. The one person I believed I could confide in had deceived me and attempted to lie about everything. I just terrified 3 individuals. One of them was myself. I'd be fortunate if the police weren't searching for me right now. If they are, I'll deal with it when I have no choice. I work in construction, namely demolition. The group I work with travels often, and I had been gone for 10 of the 14 days I was meant to be gone. Because of the rain, it's difficult to blow up wet items, and the forecast, I chose to go back home until I was assured we could operate again. My flight didn't arrive till after midnight. I wanted to surprise my wife, so I didn't tell her I was going to be there. I took a 4 to 5 minute drive from the airport to our residence. My wife discovered some gorgeous land away from any other houses via her real estate work 8 years ago. I completed constructing our home 2 years later, which we have adored ever since. Because we have a 4-car garage, any cars parked in front of us are odd. My heart sank as I saw a black SUV that I didn't recognize. I knew right away. I hadn't picked up on any signs of difficulty in our marriage. We hadn't had any disagreements. Our sex life had been wonderful and frequent. But I had a feeling I'd find out what I discovered once I got in. She would have told me if the automobile belonged to a relative who was visiting. Part of me hoped it belonged to a female colleague who had had much too much wine on a visit and wanted to sleep it off. But it would have been very unusual. I sat outside the home for at least 15 minutes, contemplating things. However, I placed my vehicle approximately 6 inches away from the driver's side of the SUV, which was parked next to a retaining wall. Whoever it belonged to would not be getting into their vehicle and driving away without my permission, nor would they be busting out a front or rear window. I parked my vehicle and entered via the deck's rear entrance. I have permission to carry a concealed firearm for a GUN before getting into my vehicle at the airport and heading home. I had placed my holster on. I wasn't worried about my life, but I was frightened of losing my cool and taking someone else's life. Everything was calm as I walked into my residence. At first, I didn't think anybody was home. But with a completed lunch for 2 on the table and a sink full of dishes, I realized there was something wrong. I strolled down the hall gently to our bedroom and turned the door carefully. I pulled the door open but heard no noise or activity. The room was completely dark. I went over to the bathroom and switched on the light. When I turned around, there was my wife, fully naked, resting on top of this man I'd never seen before. I was devastated. It was as if someone had dropped a 100-pound rock on my chest. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I understood that crying was futile and would not solve the issue. I took out my phone and started filming. I circled the bed, filming the mass of flesh in front of me. It finally dawned on me that my marriage was finished. Even though I had been completely loyal, I recognized that all of our possessions would be shared equally. When we split assets in the divorce, I suddenly understood that the home I constructed with my own hands would have to be sold. Being physically deceived hurt more than any other kind of anguish I could have imagined. Knowing I was about to be financially ruined almost caused me to lose my mind because it felt so unjust. But I knew I was through with her and would never touch her filthy body again. I was appalled by what I saw, but most of all by my wife. In my opinion, she'd gone from being a nice, caring wife to an alley-cracking 403 in 15 minutes. Neither moved an inch. I was quite positive that they were both intoxicated and passed out. I suddenly didn't care about any damage to the home I'd worked so hard on because it had to be sold. I took out my 45 and simply stared at them, both betraying me in my own bed. For a brief second, I considered shooting her, knowing that the bullets would pass right through her and kill him as well. But I came to my senses and understood that neither was worth the electric chair. And, despite my pain, I realized I could want to keep living once everything was said and done. So I drew the hammer on my GUN, hoisted it into the air, aimed to my upper right, and fired 2 bullets into the ceiling. They both awoke immediately. She was attempting to push off of him in order to turn around. When he abruptly locked eyes with me, he pushed her off of him and onto the floor. Fear does not fully characterize his expression, but in comparison to the dread in my wife's eyes, he seemed pretty serene. She attempted to convince me that it wasn't what it seemed to be, so I fired a bullet through the bedroom closet door. She swiftly silenced the duck while he still didn't say anything. They were sitting on opposite ends of our bed, the sheet drawn up to their necks. When I inquired who he was, he claimed his name was Marcus. When I asked my wife how they knew one another, she revealed that he had his own real estate firm. Then I questioned how long the adultery had been going on, since I had no idea my wife was cheating on me. She had the nerve to say it was the first and only time they'd slept together. So, in between them, I fired 2 bullets into the bed's headboard. I raised the question again after they both started weeping and asking me to stop. Marcus responded 6 months later, much to my astonishment. It irritated me, but at least I knew the truth. When I asked my wife when she quit loving me, she lied through tears and claimed she never did. I'd fired 2 shots into the bathroom on her side of the bed, causing her to scream as mirror glass broke all over the counter and floor. I told her she was a useless liar, and I was done with her falsehoods. She was plainly experiencing a panic attack, and rightly so. But I didn't care at the time. I inquired about the man's marital status. He said that he was. When I inquired whether he had any children who would miss him, he choked before confessing that he had 2. I told him how much I appreciated his pointing out to me that my wife was before we had children together. But I questioned him whether having sex with a cheating 403 was worth the risk of losing his wife and children. He pleaded with me not to inform his wife. I advised him to stop talking since she had a 50% probability of becoming a widow at the time. I walked at the foot of the bed for the next 15 minutes, drawing a GUN and trying to think. I was aware that keeping them there against their will might be seen as my taking hostages. I knew I'd have to let them go at some point. I motioned for my wife to get up and go fetch her vehicle keys. She got out of bed and started reaching down to pick up her clothing from the floor to put it back on. I told her to stop, that she didn't need clothing, and to go fetch the keys. She went down the hall, returned her keys, and handed them to me while still weeping. I took the home key from her and informed her that she would no longer need it. I know she wanted to argue that I couldn't do it and that she was legally correct. A 4-5, on the other hand, tends to render legality moot. I then instructed Marcus to get up, take his keys and wallet from his trousers and accompany me. I followed him outside to his vehicle and repeatedly hit him in the face until his nose and lips were bleeding. I returned after moving my vehicle so he could get into his SUV, took up his keys, and urged Marcus to get up. I told him he could go home right then and confess everything to his wife, or she'd hear from me within 48 hours with all the proof of his adultery I'd gathered. I also told him he had 40 seconds to leave my property or a coroner would be taking him away. The fact that he was naked appeared to be a minor concern at the time. He jumped in his vehicle and drove away before I could count to 25. I returned inside, where my wife had changed into a robe and was sitting at the kitchen table. I went to her bedroom, took her cell phone, and delivered it to her in the kitchen. I inquired if she wanted me to contact her parents or sister to come pick her up. She flatly refused. I'd even inquired if she wanted me to contact the cops. I believe she expected us to talk about things in order to clear the air. Thus she replied, no. She started to explain, but I cut her off and informed her we were done for good as far as I was concerned. I told her that our house was no longer her home and that she needed to get in her vehicle and go somewhere that wasn't our place. I emphasized that after what she'd done, I no longer felt any love for her and that there would be no second chances. She started apologizing, crying, and pleading. Less quiet resulted after 2 shots fired into the double oven and 1 into the fridge. Having a neighbor who is more than 2 miles away has its advantages. I told her that I didn't care whether I lived or died, and that her actions had completely devastated me. I also said that the moment I saw her and Marcus nude together, all of my love for her changed to hatred. If Thanos could have erased her from existence in my memory at that instant, I would have done so. I told her I was struggling to keep my cool in the face of my affection for her. I suggested she go to the garage, get in her vehicle, and drive away forever. She cried her way out of the garage, into her vehicle, and drove away. That was around 5 hours ago. I didn't want to deal with any police who happened to turn up there, knowing I could have committed a felony or 2 with my response. Before leaving and getting back into my vehicle, I turned off everything and secured the doors. My father has a fishing cottage that he and his mates frequent. I drove here and let myself in using the secret spare key. When I arrived, it was much too early to phone anybody. I decided I wanted something to drink, and I'm about a quarter of the way through a bottle of my father's Balvenie scotch. My dad is going to be furious until I tell him what my wife did. I'm also quite sure it's the bottle I got him for his birthday last month. I'm at a loss as to what to do. I've combed through threads on this subreddit and others in search of solutions. However, the majority seem to be folks attempting to determine whether or not their spouse is cheating. I already know the truth, so as much as I want to know the truth, all the justifications for adultery ring hollow. Other articles seem to be techniques for getting a cheater back. I'm not sure why someone would want to reclaim a cheating spouse, but I'm looking for a divorce. I want it in my favor as soon as possible. She will never be able to choose me again. I'm not a carnival prize, but rather a human being. I want to get rid of her and destroy all traces of her in my life. I never want to see or hear from her again. Is it possible for attorneys to handle everything? I have the funds to get things started. What I lack is the time, energy, and patience to deal with this nonsense. 8 years of marriage gone down the toilet. After what I just saw, I now believe her to be one big lie, because after what I just saw, I can't trust anything she's ever said to me is true. 8 years of my life were squandered on a wicked con artist. Part of me wishes I'd simply shot them both and taken my own life. But it may just be the scotch talking. I'm going to get my carp tested just to make sure that 403 didn't give me anything. Actually, now that I think about it, I've wasted a decade on her. Her actions have devalued my life and rendered my time with her meaningless. The only thing I'll remember about this marriage is that honesty and loyalty are things of the past. Herpes is the one thing that lasts permanently in any relationship these days. It is all about avoiding lies in love and marriage. I'm terribly, really depressed right now. Some, I'm sure, already see me as a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal for reacting violently to violence and threats. I'm also aware that some may criticize me for using one of my GUN. I didn't shoot anybody, and the bedsheets were already soiled when I did. If gunshot holes diminish the price of the home by a few $1,000s, I can live with that. I really can't take any more of this. Part of me simply wants to beat a bullet and give up. My life is over, and it's not coming back even if I wanted it to. People will claim I escaped a bullet irony by not having children with my wife and discovering she's unfaithful. That doesn't seem to be the case right now. I move from uncontrollable tears to wrath like I've never experienced. Either I confront this or I simply give up. For the time being, the second alternative seems to be the superior option. Maybe if I fall out and sleep for a while, things won't seem so horrible. But I have my doubts. The weather prediction indicates that things will clear up sufficiently to allow me to work in a few days, so I will need to fly the day before. For a variety of reasons, I dislike the area in which we are working. But a part of me wants to leave after the task is done and never return. Part of me wants to find out where I want to start again, if I want to start over at all. What factors should I consider before choosing a lawyer's there a ranking system for legal services on Yelp or another website? I despise lawyers. Members of the most shady legal profession. Now I need to locate the most tenacious lawyer I can find. Please accept my apologies for the wall of words. It wasn't quite as therapeutic as I had thought. But nothing is going to make this pain go away anytime soon. What on earth am I expected to do? What's the purpose of accomplishing anything at all? The person I was sacrificing my all for is no longer with us, and I realized today that he never existed. I was far from perfect, but I remained loyal. I was never stern. She never heard me shout like that before today. I was a wonderful spouse. I enjoyed being married and devoted. But for every wonderful person out there, there's a harlot ready to dig her claws into him and wreck his life for her own benefit. Not this life, my soon-to-be ex-wife and relationships. Now I'm simply rambling. I guess I'll go to bed now. When I wake up, I think I'll call my folks and tell them what happened. I'm still in shock, and I've never experienced such heartbreak in my life. Maybe I'll feel better tomorrow.